Thank you. Thanks very much, Deborah, and thank you all for being here, and I hope you're going to enjoy our session. My name is Dan Brooke. As Deborah intimated, I've actually left Channel 4. I'm on garden leave. Good if you can get it. While I've got my feet up, I'm thinking about my new company, which I'm going to start later on in the summer, which is all about helping companies and businesses do more social good. So my slogan will be something like helping companies do better by doing good. But I have three far more interesting and talented people here on stage with me. I've got Vici Wreford-Sinnott, who is a playwright and theatre director and also a disability equality strategist. She's going to explain what that is in a minute. She's the artistic director of Little Cog, a disabled-led theatre company based in the north of England. And sitting next to Vici is Simon Startin, who's a writer, actor and director in both the worlds of theatre and in television drama, and has been in a number of dramas for people like the BBC, Channel 4 and Paramount. And sitting next to Simon on the end is Paula Garfield, who is an actor and director. Paula founded and is artistic director of Deafinitley Theatre, and she was the first deaf person to set up a theatre in the UK. And alongside Paula in front here, we've got Anna and Natasha, who are Paula's interpreters. So welcome to all of you. Thanks very much for coming. You are predominantly, I would say, from the theatre world. I'm predominantly from the television world. So what I was hoping from this session is that we would try and learn a lot from you about your experiences, but also hear what you think the TV world could do better. Before I do that, I'm just going to say a couple of things about the Doubling Disability Project, which I'm really excited about. It's the first of what I hope will be a number of big projects that come out of the Diamond Data, led by the CDN and Deborah's brilliant work for the CDN. As Deborah said, you know, the reason why the first project coming out of Diamond Data is about disability is because the representation, the data really clearly shows that the representation of disabled people on screen and off screen, while there has been some small improvement on screen, not so much off screen, between the first and the second cuts of the Diamond Data, disabled people are still the group involved in television who are the furthest away from their representation in the national average. So, you know, on screen, it's 5% of people are disabled or disclosing as disabled, whereas 18% of the population, the working age population, is important to make that distinction, the working age population. So it's way off the pace. I'm really excited about this project. Deborah has brought on the University of Leicester Cameo Unit. Just give us a wave, University of Leicester, who are well into their work researching what some of the issues and barriers are. They're going to develop an action plan which will be in the water in September. In the summer. Summer? Yes, thank you. I'm excited about it, but I'm also frustrated about this situation. Why? Because we're all in the creative industries, and I'm sure many of us are in television. And the thing that I find so surprising and frustrating about this data is that what I find really frequently in my work and in meeting disabled people is that very often disabled people are more creative and very often more resourceful than the norm. Why? Because, first of all, they often have a different perspective on the world, but also, secondly, they're trying to advance and be successful in a world that is not designed for them. So, perhaps to talk about some of those issues and your own experiences, I'm just going to go down the line. Everyone's going to talk. Each of the three panelists is going to talk about their experiences, and then we're going to have a discussion after that. So, Vici, if I may start with you, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks very much, Dan. I think I'll just start by saying that I think we should set up a band called Dan and the Disabled. It's a winner. I love it. Love it. I just wanted to, just before I start, give a couple of statistics. I know we're hearing a lot about statistics today. I think that there are 19% of the population are disabled people, and where I come from in the northeast, based in Stockton-on-Tees in Teesside, up to 24% of the population are disabled people there. And the other thing is that 70% of us will become disabled as we age, either through the aging process or accidents, the development of conditions. It's really important that we think about disability as family. With those kind of statistics, we've all got disabled people in our families. And it's important that those people are supported and represented as equally as everyone else. The things that I'm going to just talk about today, I've called it Whose Lens Is It Anyway? So yeah, I'm a disabled theatre director and writer, trained many years ago now. I've been the artistic director of 3 theatre companies. My current company is Little Cog, as Dan said, and we are a disabled-led company committed to giving platforms to the extraordinary voices of disabled people. I work a lot as a writer-director, and there are reasons for that relate to being a disabled person, which I'll talk about. And I work predominantly with professional disabled actors, although not exclusively. And that's not because we want to isolate ourselves. It's to ensure that we are in control of the lens that tells our story. Our stories have either not been told or have been mistold for as long as we can remember. And when I started out as a director 3 centuries ago, I couldn't really find the stories that I wanted to tell or that related to me. And there were many obstacles and barriers in telling those stories of disabled people with disabled people, many of which are attitudinal, around fear or a lack of education. And so, in addition to being an artist, being a creative, I knew I had to be strategic as well. So, so I had to fight for space, which grew into fighting our corner, so as a community of disabled people. Disability equality, culture and representation is often referred to as the poor relation in diversity. And if you look at many diversity campaigns and documents, the word disability is not mentioned. I think that's because in some ways we're the least understood. We have very low status in society. We don't have a kind of a single solid identity to latch onto and say, oh yeah, that's what disability is. It's a really broad area, and disability covers a whole range of impairments around physical impairments, sensory impairments, around mental health, dyslexia. It's a really broad umbrella. So it's hard to pin down. Some of us just want to tell stories. We just want to tell any story. We want to tell all stories. And some of us want to tell the stories of disability and disabled people. It isn't widely understood that disabled people do have a shared historical and social experience. As I've said, we're cast often as low status. And that's a myth, obviously, but it's hard to break myths. It's the story that's been told for as long as we can remember. Quite often, we're tragic, we're pitiable, we're charity cases, others know best about us. And it's hard to challenge that when that story's been around for 2,000 years. We do share some horror stories. As a community, we have had institutionalisation, exclusion, being ignored and underestimated, that we lack in capacity. Well, this panel and Deborah Williams are here to tell you that we do not lack capacity and that we do have talent and we have extraordinary stories to tell. We absolutely should not be the poor relation. We are the new sexy. There, I've said it. Disability can be sexy. Us lot, yeah? In the band, oh, I can see it now, yeah. I'm imagining that's why Deb has invited me, really, to bring the sexy. And also to be a bit of like a horse whisperer. I am a disability whisperer. You will love us. You will fall in love with our stories. We are fine. We're talented. is a bit awkward. Hang on. Okay. The timing feels good, though. There is more visibility now than there has been on our screens, a little bit more in soaps, and obviously the winning of a massive talent competition recently. But it's not enough. It's not enough, and it doesn't improve our the understanding of who we are. And that means if we don't understand who 24%, 19% of our population are, then actually the identity crisis that we're currently in, that needs addressing. We need to tell the truth a bit more about who we are. So as I said, the time is right and we have to go large. There are disabled people's stories to be told through our own lens. Not the lens of our parents and our carers, not the lens of those who feel sorry for us or think they know best about us. We actually live vibrant, challenging, exciting lives. We have stories to tell about family dramas, poverty, political dramas, hard-hitting crime dramas, sex and drugs and rock and roll. Oh, that was my weekend, hang on. All of those things we have stories to tell about. So anyway, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the strategic work. I spent 10 years, I put my own work on the back burner and became CEO of 2 organisations, Arts and Disability Ireland in the Republic of Ireland and Arcadia in the northeast of England. And we had a remit to address disability equality in culture, largely in arts and culture, not in broadcasting. Broadcasting has always felt just a little bit out of reach. We developed a number of hugely successful programmes and opportunities to develop disabled artists and voices. I did a similar thing, as I said, in the northeast with Arcadia. And I now work regionally, nationally and internationally. I'm still working towards change and towards an equal platform for disabled talent. I'm in contact with hundreds of disabled artists. It's a myth that the talent isn't out there. I know disabled people who could walk into writers, directors, producers, on-screen talent roles, if only they were there. Of course, all the time we spend fighting our corner is time spent away from our art form, our work, and that can be exhausting. As I said, things are beginning to improve. The theatre world has let us in somewhat, in small ways. We're not just talking about initiatives that have no end, no goal in sight. We actually want to be able to take part in things that have results, that make sure we're on the telly, that make sure we're in films and on stage. It feels a bit like there is a code, a padlock on the door, and we don't have the combination yet. It's not clear how we get in. There are a few reasons for that. It's complicated. As I said, there have been myths around for 2,000 years, and those views are entrenched. And just to round off, I'm just going to say that the strategic work that I've been involved in, we did a 3-year programme in a mainstream arts organisation in the northeast of England called Cultural Shift, and it was absolutely about what we're talking about now. And it was systemic. It has to be. The approach we take, it can't just be about numbers. They're important. It's important to have targets. But we absolutely need to tackle things on an artistic level and also on a strategic level, so that we're not landing disability in like an alien a concept. There has to be a backup around that. So the Cultural Shift looked at making sure we had commissions, programming and residencies to support disabled artists and creatives, but also organisational development was in place so that organisations could understand their role in removing barriers and what adjustments and accessibility they needed to put in place. And Disconsortia is a brand new organisation of extraordinary disabled voices who are delighted to have the opportunity to work alongside Doubling Disability to support disabled talent off-screen and on-screen, and also to simultaneously support broadcasters and production companies in the area of disability practice. and how we look at that strategically and in the long term, not short-term initiatives and not kind of shortcuts and easy answers. We've got to embed it in who we are as a nation and how we tell the stories of everybody. We are totally enriched as a society if we make sure that there's space to tell everybody's stories. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Vicky. That was powerful, and so, much of what you say resonates with what I get told by a lot of people a lot of the time. You know, not least this thing about the talent. Because there's no issue with talent. The issue is liberating talent. Can I just ask you one thing in response to what you said? There's a lot of people here, as I said, from television. Some senior people in the television industry here. You said that in your remarks that in some of your work, television felt, you know, almost out of reach. Can you just talk a little bit about why you felt that was and how that could be improved?
Okay, so I can talk about myself as a script writer and as a theatre director, obviously not a television director, very different. But the opportunities to break through, I think partly because the myths are so entrenched. We already have had, certainly recently, some stories told that are not from a disability lens. There isn't the understanding about what it's like to be a disabled person. There are tropes that we continue to repeat that are about the disaster, the tragedy that befalls families where disability strikes. And if that's the predominant view of disability and disabled people, then anybody who's reading my script, when it lands on the table in a mass call out or a mass opportunity, they're either going to think, oh, this has been done before, because they're not seeing the nuance, which is really important to talk to disabled people about the different lenses. We need the opportunity to tell stories our way. And also just the fact that I think there is a lot of confusion. There's an expectation that there's a lot of work involved in working with disabled people. Sometimes it's actually really easy. We already have the answers. We know we've been living this 24/7 all of our lives. So it's the barriers that are there about lack of information, lack of opportunity, and I think there's a feeling that there aren't the people with the knowledge. We could be completely wrong about that, but from this distance it feels like we couldn't talk to somebody in a friendly way about what disability actually is and why we need to change the narrative.
Okay, well, thank you. That sounds exactly right. I mean, certainly on my travels, I'm often struck by the fact that just information and awareness about what it means to be a disabled person, to have a particular type of disability, that goes an enormously long way. So, you know, and everybody here can do something about that. They can educate themselves better, and I would encourage you all to do that. And I think that the world will change more than people think as a result of that simple thing, which doesn't cost anybody anything. Right, Simon, tell us your experiences.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to pick up the baton from Vicky on the subject of story. Now, we as human beings tell stories. It's a fundamental thing of what we do. We've been doing it for tens of thousands of years. It's been going very well. Well done. Carry on. But in the ancient tradition of storytellers, stories themselves are not regarded as mere entertainment. They are regarded as medicine, as imparting some kind of health, both to the community and to the individual. So what exactly is going on when a group of people are excluded from the process of story? What is the nature of the medicine being prescribed? If we follow these people into our stories, if we allow these people into our stories, will that medicine somehow be poisoned? Disabled people know well enough what it's like to be excluded from everyday life, from buildings, from schooling, from the workplace and the political forums, from our sexual playgrounds, etc., etc. That's a given. But to be erased from the process of story, that, my friends, is an act of barbarity. For the past 25 years, I've been trying to find a pathway for disabled people into the human story and on our own terms. Not as semaphores for redemption and suffering, not as inspiration porn for the neurotically healthy, but as people. I'd like to share some pathways I found. They are by no means an exhaustive list. Feel free to invent your own, but I give you these at least to open your eyes to different possibilities and perspectives. The first epiphany came to me at the very beginning of my career, way back in the 90s. Yes, I'm that old. And it was when I did a show with Paula here, with Grey Eye, who are a theatre company that work with disabled people and are led by disabled people. And the production was Ubu by Alfred Jarry. And at one point in the story, the tyrant Ubu is about to execute some peasants during a time of war, and one of his victims appeals to him to ask his conscience whether he should spare their lives. Now, completely out of character, Ubu says, yeah, why not? Yeah, I'll give it a go. Yeah, great. And he summons his conscience to appear. Rising out of the peasant's pram came Paula as Ubu's conscience, who delivered a beautiful speech in BSL on mercy, kindness, and the responsibilities of power. It was an incredible theatrical moment, a perfect embodiment of conscience, and being performed in sign a fully realized metaphor which able-bodied people cannot do. I saw in that moment disabled performers had access to a language of storytelling that grew out of the mechanics of access, but was not defined by deficit or fragility, but by beauty and insight. It showed disabled performers have more to offer than being objects of impairment voyeurism to alleviate enabled guilt. It was very good medicine. The next potential I've explored is in satire. Because of the outsider status foisted on us, disabled people have an unsurpassed skill in making the rest of you look ridiculous. The very process of othering us reveals the folly and cowardice of enabled assumptions. The simple truth is there are no others. Everyone in this room will, barring a few unhappy sudden deaths, please don't do that now, will become disabled. It's a universal human experience that hopefully will happen to you all. So in excluding us disableds, you are in fact erasing a truth about yourselves. A story that excludes is a story that lies, not good medicine. The last approach I want to share with you is just throw out the bloody rule book, particularly the casting rule book. A few years ago, the RSC asked me a very stupid question. They asked, what can disabled people do for Shakespeare? And they allowed me some R&D money, provided I employ some so-called able-bodied people as well. And I answered it by turning the casting process on its head. Never mind trying to solve disability. I just ripped up the tenets of a casting process, disregarding race, gender, impairment, age, anything. And, lo and behold, a miraculous thing happened. At last, all humanity was here. By including disabled people, the excluded of the excluded, everyone was free from the often fascistic tendencies of the casting process. Cliché evaporated, and diversity was not a buzzword or a policy imposition, but a simple song singing, "This is who we are." People. Full stop. Next question. Furthermore, if you allow disabled people to participate in narratives in full expression of all facets of our identity, fathers, mothers, lovers, thieves, heroes, villains, market stall traders, whatever, we all gain. As I said, these pathways are by no means exhaustive. There are many ways to skin a diversity rabbit, but what I'm appealing for is a widening of perspective. Let disabled people move away from being fetishes of inspiration, but are not about our experience, but about your fear. Let us move away from the same old tired disability tropes, with the story obstacle being born of a vapid medical bromide, and allow us into the centre of stories as fully fledged, complex people that we actually are. We are all the same, we are all infinite. If we do that, well, the wisdom of the ancient storytellers will no doubt return. And in so doing, when you eventually all acquire the disability that you so richly deserve, as part of the full human experience of life before death, you will not be overwhelmed by horror. You will not hide your face in shame or weep your fate, because you will have been fortified with good medicine and know that you are still part of the human story. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Simon. Can I ask you? You spoke very eloquently about being excluded from storytelling. Can you? I don't know how many people here will be aware of the concept of the social model of disability. I know that's something that you and many people feel strongly about. I wonder if you could just unpack that and talk about other ways in which you feel that the world is not designed for you.
Okay, well, the social model of disability basically says that a medical model would say, okay, a disabled person has a problem, let's get the knives out and fix it, or whatever, or lock them away and so we can't see them, or just tell them tough luck. The social model says no, there are barriers being put in place. If a set of stairs is created by other people than the disabled person in a wheelchair, but if you put in a ramp, boing, the problem is solved. So that's the social model in a nutshell. The barriers are social responsibilities to remove. It is not the individual disabled person's problem. Within the media and TV and theatre and within storytelling, we are excluded because they're attitudinal. Never mind the ramps and the audition rooms up 7 flights of steps and all that sort of thing. That's stupid, but that's not within the kind of wit of anybody to solve. It's the attitudinal stories. It's saying, okay, I can see you as a disabled person, but I can't see you as a doctor. I can't see you as a policeman. I can't see you as a teacher or a father or anything else. That's the kind of attitudinal barriers being put in place at the moment, which I throw is not a disabled person's or actor's fault to solve. It's unsolvable for them because they're at the grip of the casting process. It's up to the creatives, the contents, and all the way up to the top to say, right, we need to redefine how we approach the casting process, how we approach the storytelling process, and remove those attitudinal barriers to it, and then you get a fully realised display, smorgasbord of who humanity is. So that, in terms of social model and the media industry, I think is sort of the nutshell of it all.
Right, now let's have Paula, and I think it's Natasha who's going to be interpreting for Paula.
Oh, hello, yeah, it's working. I'm just going to stand up, actually. It's easier for me to sign. My name is Paula Garfield. I was born profoundly deaf. I worked for an actor for 10 years in television and theatre as a freelancer, and I set up a company. Well, I was in a TV programme called Switch, and that was a group of deaf actors working together. That was 2001 to 2006. So it went on for 5 years, and there were 14 episodes. I think we had 80% of deaf actors casted, and also we had hearing actors who could sign fluently and had deaf awareness, and that was, they're part of the community. The director themselves was also deaf, and it was really a drama series for, on the street, kind of a drama series that was attractive to a deaf and hearing audience. And it was almost kind of that idea of, feeling as one, the same. Unfortunately, in 2007, the BBC decided to cut Switch, and it was dropped, just like that. The deaf community was shocked, couldn't understand why that had happened, and the BBC said, well, if you want to carry that on, you need to write a letter to say that you'd like to carry on. However, deaf people don't necessarily have great understanding or writing English, so that was a real barrier for the deaf community. So that was the end of that series. The same happened with Channel 4, a series called Rush. And that ran a parallel time to Switch. So Switch was stopped, and then suddenly Rush was also stopped. And there hadn't been anything since, no programs where the deaf community were represented. Deaf actors who were in both those programs, all of a sudden their jobs were gone. And very few deaf actors could survive, really, because within that career, because of the sudden stop. I grew up in the 1970s myself, and there was a lack of role models for me. None whatsoever, really, for myself growing up. And, role models are so important. To see deaf leaders, where was that represented? Deaf female leaders, there's nothing that I saw growing up. And the reason is it's important to have deaf role models, because myself, growing up, I actually believed that when I was an adult, I would become hearing, because I didn't have any role models or any deaf adults to look at and learn from. So I had this understanding that I would grow up to become hearing, because I had no role models. 90% of deaf children are born to hearing families, and those hearing families cannot necessarily sign, so they can't communicate direct to their own child, and I was one of those children. Within the deaf community, we have deaf culture, big D. So deaf culture doesn't mean we eat the same food or dress the same. It means we share a language, British Sign Language. That is our shared culture. And also, as a community, we have that sense of identity. So we share the same experiences. And culture for us is so important. And that's why it's important to represent that in television and theatre. I was the first deaf person to set up Deafinitley Theatre in 2002. It was the first time in 30 years that a deaf company was led by a deaf person. So that was in 2002, and that's been going for 17 years. And we've influenced lots of other theatre companies who have decided to set up other companies where it's a mixture of deaf and hearing, 50-50. So we've kind of got out to the mainstream in that respect. Also, we wanted to inspire other theatre companies to actually employ or cast deaf actors. So, for example, the Royal Shakespeare Company, the Globe, the Royal Court, and the Bush Theatre, because they would look at Deafinitley Theatre and actually learn from our experiences and think about how they could actually employ deaf actors. Deafinitley Theatre, we use bilingual, so we have English and BSL. Obviously, BSL is the main language on stage, but we use strategies such as voiceover, so an audience hearing can understand the play. And we also cast 50% deaf, 50% hearing. We have a creative team who may necessarily be hearing, but what we have is we train them in deaf awareness. We have access, we have interpreters, so the creative team work together, whether they're deaf or whether they're hearing. There are no barriers, there are no issues. We improvise just the same as any other hearing company would, and it's all about shared experiences. For myself, I'm really, really passionate about raising awareness with sign language, because BSL has been quite an oppressive language. At school, I wasn't allowed to use sign language. I was actually, if I signed, I was told to touch my head or sit on my hands on a chair. So I wasn't allowed to express myself through sign language. So TV and the stage is a really powerful tool to represent sign language, and it's such a beautiful, rich language that needs to be represented, whether that's a deaf or hearing audience. The British government finally recognised British Sign Language, so it became a recognised language, and it had its own rights, and that was in the 19th of March 2003. So pretty recently, if you think about it. So it's been a long campaign to have the language recognised. The public, there's 65 million people, and out of 65 million people in the UK, people become deaf from birth, or become deafened from an accident, or from an illness. So there is a percentage of people that will become deaf. It could become from old age as well. So that's 11 million, but only 50,000 of those use British Sign Language. So we really need to promote sign language and have it visible. 90% of deaf children are born in hearing families, as I mentioned before. So the language is not recognised, so children can't communicate with their own families. They don't see that language in television, in the theatre, so they don't have deaf role models. So Deafinitley Theatre, we have a Deafinitley Youth Hub. So we have workshops that we go out to, we do family shows as well, and we have a main production every year. So we set up training as well for actors. We do partnership with RADA as well, and we've done a writing course as well for deaf and hearing people, and that's with the Royal Court Theatre. So doing workshops in both those places and working in collaboration. Also, I do a lot of consultancy to do some advice on deaf awareness as well, or advocacy. So I go out and about a lot, and it's really important to break those barriers. So the theatre world is doing very, very well in that sense, but the television, as mentioned before, there is a barrier. So really thinking about British Sign Language, the BSL-BT, I just wanted to know how many of you know about the British Sign Language BSL-BT? Anybody heard of BSL-BT or BSL Zone? Any hands? Just 1, 2, 3, okay. So BSL-BT, they best practice similar to what we're doing in theatre, they're doing in television, and that's thinking about deaf awareness, using deaf and hearing actors, and deaf films by deaf people, but it's their own channel, which is great. So they're producing more work for deaf people, deaf filmmakers, deaf writers, producers. So that's fantastic. So the BSL-BT and BSL Zone are great role models for that. But that is only shown on Ghetto. And I'd like to see that, the work that those people are producing, directing, acting in the mainstream. So actually it's not only a deaf audience, you're actually reaching out to a hearing and deaf audience. So I'd like to see more of that in the mainstream. And remember, you know, I grew up without any role models. TV, children watch TV. You know, they need to see role models. And I think it's so, so important for identity. Especially for me, you know, growing up, I didn't have that. And I want to be proud, and I want other children to be proud of their identity and deafness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula. That was absolutely fascinating. Can I ask you, just picking up on your last point about the accessibility services that are provided by TV companies, in particular the signing of programs, what you think of that? Because the major public service broadcasters have an obligation and I think other broadcasters do too, that a certain proportion of programmes will be signed. But it's quite low. It's about, I think about, someone correct me, but it's about 5% for signed programmes. What do you think of what's offered, and how could it be improved?
Personally, I have 2 deaf children, and they prefer to watch subtitled programmes because we're a bilingual community, and our language is part of that. So they access subtitles, and where there is in-vision interpreters, they can't see that. So they want to see programmes where there's actually deaf actors involved in those programmes, and sign language is dominant rather than just being at the side of the television screen. So, you know, my children, I want them to watch programmes, you know, similar to Switch and similar to Rush, where the actors are deaf and they're seeing access to their own language. So it becomes a norm rather than something different. I think interpreters stood in the corner of the screen. I don't think that's fantastic access, if I'm honest, personally.
Well, I think that's excellent feedback for those responsible for those services in the room. Now, we've got a small number of minutes left, so what I'm going to do is give you each a last minute. I can ask you to try and keep to a minute. Just to say, what, you know, you've got amazing people from the television industry here. If you could say one thing to them to get them to do things differently, what would it be? Paula, why don't we stay with you?
I think really to set up consultancy with the community, training for actors or directors, producers. Think about creatives, just thinking about being creative. So offer deaf people those experiences as you would hearing people.
Fantastic, thank you. Simon?
I'm reflecting on what's been useful to me in my career in theatre, because I haven't really got into television in any real form for the reasons I outlined, is the we need 3 things. We need champions. I have had consistent and loyal champions who are already there in their jobs, being paid, doing the right thing, and they have consistently used me as a writer, as an actor, as a director, and that has enabled me to have a career in theatre. The television needs to do the same. Olivia Colman, right, has champions within the BBC and other television things, so she has had a rather good career. Now television won't be able to afford her because she's got an Oscar, so maybe you could champion some disabled actors who can appear with the same degree of regularity as lovely Olivia does. The second thing we need is money. We need investment and spreadsheets where disabled people are considered and given talent funds, training, development, so money. And thirdly, we just need you to change your attitude and open your mind.
Yeah, agreed. Paula.
Gosh, just one thing. There's a lot to do. There really is a lot to do, but I think the starting point has got to be developing relationships with disabled creatives. There are very experienced disabled writers and directors, producers and actors in this country. We are respected across the world for our disability arts and disability theatre movement. It's just ironic that we're celebrated in other parts of the world in ways that we aren't here. Theatre is switching on. I've recently spoken to the National Theatre, the Royal Court, about my work. There need to be similar champions, as Simon said, within broadcasting, that people that we know we can actually go and talk to and build relationships with.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, thank you very much to the panel. If I could, my one final thought would be, I mean, I think television, the world of television has left base camp as far as disabled people are concerned. Base camp is below us, but I can tell you the peak of Everest is a hell of a long way off. I mean, it's a hell of a long way off. We have barely started. So, you know, one of the things I think for me that has come out strongly from our panelists is if my message to people here who are not yet disabled is go and try and find out more. You know, go and talk to a disabled person. Go and get on the internet. Talk to whoever in your organisation you think might have more knowledge than you. And if you're a disabled person, do the same, because whatever your disability is probably different from someone else's disability. So if you do one thing from this, go away and try and just find out more about disabled people. And I never come across anybody who, having done that, says, yeah, it was quite interesting, but it wasn't for me. People do the opposite. They say, God, that's absolutely fascinating, give me more. Thank you very much, and thank you to our panel.